I'm really excited about this next panel. We're really shifting in. Can Congress really deal with climate? This is Daniel Lashof, who I've known for a number of years through my work with environmental entrepreneurs and going to DC and work on climate policy. And he's been one of the greatest Sherpas I've had in getting to know how Congress works, how to navigate them, how to communicate with them, and what we're up against, every year when we worked on climate policy. Since then, I think he's relocated out of the Beltway. Are you back in Berkeley now? Okay. Well, apparently, the Beltway, doesn't have the appeal that a fine place like Berkeley does. But I hope in your relaxation away from that, you've come up with some fantastic new insights about what we can do to shift this Congress. So let's hear it for Dan Lashof.
Thank you very much. I recently did move out of the Beltway, and I had been in Berkeley and finished graduate work there, and went to take a job in Washington and start working on climate policy, and was planning to stay for three or 4 years. And it took about 27 years to get back to the West Coast. I'm really glad I did. Hopefully have some insights that I'll share from both my time in Washington and more recently being back in DC. But it's really great to be here in this windowless conference room located in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It's a testament to the great program that AREDAY has put together, Chip and his team, that there's anybody left in the room, and to your dedication for being here. So I thank you for that. I have great admiration for the organizing model of the Citizens Climate Lobby, their approach, working to put together concerned citizens in every congressional district and pounding the pavement, meeting with members of Congress to get their message out. And I really hope that they're right and that they're able to turn Congress around very quickly. But I'm afraid that in those 25 years I did spend inside the Beltway, I don't share that optimism in terms of how quickly we can turn it around, although I do think that we will, because we simply have no choice. But what we heard yesterday was that when it comes to the inevitable clean energy revolution, Congress has 3 choices. It can lead, it can follow, or it can get out of the way. So let's take a look and see how Congress is doing. If I can figure out how the clicker works. So, is there a clicker? Is that? No, that's that. Where's the clicker? Ah. This is ours. There we go. Okay. So this is the chairman of the Senate Environment Committee. So much for leadership. He is proving that global warming doesn't exist by bringing a snowball onto the Senate floor. Thank you, Mr. Inhofe. Okay. So how about following? Well, not so much. Mitch McConnell is the Senate Majority Leader. I gather he's going to be in Aspen tomorrow, so maybe some people want to go over there and talk to him. He has made blocking EPA's Clean Power Plan his top priority. He has gone so far as to write to all 50 governors and urge them to ignore the requirement of the Clean Power Plan and to refuse to submit a state plan for meeting its targets. Now, that would mean that governors would actually give up the opportunity to customize a plan for their own state circumstances. And instead, EPA would be required under the law to implement a federal plan. So I think most states are not going to follow Mitch McConnell's bad advice. So that's a bit of good news. But certainly, there's no evidence that he's going to lead Congress or to even follow the president's lead on climate policy. Now, what about getting out of the way? Well, he's going to do everything he can to get in the way. But with the help of a few judicious uses of President Obama's veto pen, I think we can count on Congress being out of the way for a while, or perhaps more accurately, being pushed to the sidelines for a period of time. Now, it was not always like this. 2007 was not that long ago. In 2007, we actually had bipartisan climate legislation being given serious consideration in the Congress. Do you remember when John McCain was a grumpy maverick who was willing to cross the aisle and work with Democrats to promote solutions to climate change instead of just grumpy? That was not that long ago, only 8 years. Then in 2008, Barack Obama is elected president of the United States. He is run on a platform of very progressive climate legislation, not too different from what the Citizen Climate Lobby is talking about, with an auction and dividend of revenues. The Democrats win 60 seats. Barbara Boxer, not Inhofe, is chair of the Senate Environment Committee. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. John Holdren, Tim Wirth's good friend, is the President's Science Advisor. He still is, by the way. I mean, it was the environmental dream team. Not only that, we had a broad business environmental coalition called US CAP that put forward a blueprint for what federal legislation that could look like, that had support of mainstream business community as well as environmental organizations. And Waxman and Markey took up that blueprint largely and turned it into legislation which passed the House of Representatives in the summer of 2009. What could possibly go wrong? Well, pretty much everything. The climate bill crashed and burned in the Senate, the Democrats lost control of the Senate in the 2010 election. The center right, as Tom Friedman called them, was replaced with the hard right, and the whole idea of bipartisanship went out the window. Now, some say that the problem was in the details of the Waxman-Markey bill, that it was either too ambitious or not ambitious enough, that maybe it was too complicated, and that if we'd had a fee and dividend bill, things would have been different. But I believe that the real problem was both simpler and much more difficult to solve, which is that the climate movement just didn't have enough political power to win. The fact is that healthcare legislation was taken up first, and it basically used President Obama's political capital rather than rebuilding it, which was the argument that was held at the time was that a quick win on healthcare, a quick win, would build political capital, and then we'd be able to move on to do climate legislation. So the fact is that bipartisanship has been off the table ever since then. Now, at the end of 2010, after the midterm election, after Copenhagen, where I, along with thousands of other people, froze in the dark, things looked pretty bleak. And a lot of people were really struggling to figure out what to do next to deal with climate change. But fortunately, Congress had actually acted back in 1970 when it passed the Clean Air Act. And as I noted in a previous slide, the Supreme Court had ruled in 2007 that that Clean Air Act covered carbon pollution and other climate-altering pollutants. And that regulatory path had been bubbling along, sort of below the radar screen. EPA had taken steps to have a formal finding that greenhouse gases were pollutants under the Clean Air Act. It had regulated carbon pollution from the tailpipes of automobiles, although that was generally thought of as fuel economy regulation because they were done together, but it was really the first federal regulation of carbon dioxide. And that set up a predicate for using the Clean Air Act to limit carbon pollution from power plants. The problem was that conventional wisdom held that the Clean Air Act, while maybe it could legally address these issues, it would only be able to make a very small difference at a very high cost. And that was conventional wisdom, which started to change in 2012 when we at NRDC, where I was at the time, published a report showing that you could actually design a program under the Clean Air Act to make big cuts in pollution at low cost. And then at the beginning of 2013, after President Obama was reelected, we were able to really bring the environmental community together and urge him to focus on three things that were within his control. First, to raise his voice about climate change. Second, to regulate the largest source of carbon pollution in the United States using his existing executive authority, which is the carbon pollution from existing power plants. And third, reject the Keystone Pipeline. Now, all three of those things were things that were in the president's power he could do without legislation. So how are we doing on that score? Well, now we're 2 out of 3 so far, and I expect actually that the president will reject the Keystone Pipeline shortly. So where do we go from here? Despite the considerable amount of discussion among intellectuals and some activists, mostly liberals, about how conservatives should be for a carbon tax because it's a simple, elegant solution to climate change, and if you rebate all the money, it doesn't grow the size of government. There really is no evidence that actual conservative elected officials are ready to embrace that. And it's not too difficult to figure out why when you hear that the Koch brothers are going to put almost $1 billion into just the next election cycle. So to me, suggestions from, particularly when they come from liberals, that a bird in the bush, i.e. the Clean Power Plan, could be replaced with that a bird in the bush should be used to replace the bird that we have in hand in the Clean Power Plan, I think it's misguided, and I worry that it feeds a false narrative that EPA regulation is somehow incredibly expensive and onerous and inefficient, when in fact, if you look at the Clean Power Plan, it is designed to be very effective, and it has benefits that exceed the costs by as much as 6 to 1. Perhaps more if you really did the accounting right. So in fact, when people say we need a price on carbon, the Clean Power Plan is going to effectively give us a price on carbon for the biggest source as it's implemented over the next few years. And it will deliver those benefits in a very cost-effective way. Now, does that mean we can live without Congress forever? No, absolutely not. Congress is still critical. We certainly have to, in the near term, maintain a veto-proof majority of people who will stand up for EPA and prevent those who would want to shut it down and to roll back the Clean Power Plan. And in the long run, we're going to need federal legislation that's more comprehensive, that goes deeper and goes further than we can go under existing executive authority. But this analysis from the World Resources Institute actually shows that by maximizing our use of executive authority, we can stay on track to the U.S. targets that are consistent with where we need to be as part of an international agreement in Paris and implementing that over the next 10 years. So, but by 2025, we can meet the 26 to 28% reduction that President Obama has called for. Maybe we could do a little bit better if we really go far and if we also get the states to take strong action. But beyond that, we are going to need federal legislation. But it's good that we can stay on track for a while, because I think it's going to take quite a while before we can really turn Congress around. My best guess is that we are unlikely to be able to move positive federal legislation until after the next census redraws the congressional districts, allowing the Democrats to take back the House of Representatives. That won't happen until after 2020. Because I think the Republicans are very unlikely to break with their addiction to Coke industry money until they've lost several more federal elections. And So either they have to be really changed, which was going to take a while, or the Democrats have to take back control of all branches of government, which is unlikely to occur anytime real soon. Now, I hope I'm wrong. And there certainly are scenarios where change could happen much more quickly in Congress. We could pass legislation and perhaps pass a carbon tax as part of a budget deal. So I'm all for working for those solutions, but I think we need to recognize where we are and what we can do, and we certainly should not bet the planet on the possibility of a quicker turnaround. So thank you very much.